Let's get started. Welcome everyone to this session today that focuses on water, food and energy nexus as a resource for peace. My name is Susanne Schmeier. I work for IHE Delft, based here in the Netherlands, and I'll be your host and your moderator today. But I'll be joined by a rather large panel of experts that look at water, energy and food security and/or the security and peace dimensions of it. But I'll introduce that panel to you later. Let me first clarify a few housekeeping issues that are important for today's session. So first of all, please note that the session is being recorded. This means that if you do not agree to be recorded or to be in a session that is being recorded, we would kindly ask you to leave the session. But if you're okay with being recorded, please stay with us. And it also has the advantage that we'll actually share the entire session with you afterwards, either to rewatch it yourself or to share it with your colleagues and your friends. I'd also like to remind everyone to keep your cameras off and, very importantly, to keep your microphone off, because otherwise we'll be hearing background noise and echoes from all around the world, and we don't want that. The speakers and the panelists, I'd like to kindly invite them to turn their microphone, of course, but also their camera on when you're speaking, so that everyone can also see you and not only hear you. And all the participants, were very curious to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts that you have on the session, on the topic, and please kindly share them in the chat box. So on the lower side of your screen, below where you currently see the slide, you have a number of little icons, and one is a little chat icon. So use that, post the chats and or your questions in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on those. And we'll try to answer as many of them as possible, depending on what time allows, of course. But let's get started. So as I was saying, this session today will focus on the linkages between water, energy and food security on the one hand, and security in terms of stability, conflict, competition, peace or war on the other hand. And we attempt to explore how food, energy and water insecurities can potentially lead to conflict and how that has happened in different regions. That's why we're joined by people from very different geographies. But we're also particularly interested in seeing how these resources can actually become resources for peace. But before discussing that with the different panelists, I'd like to first invite Henk Oving. Henk Oving is the Dutch water envoy, to share his thoughts on the topic with us in his short keynote speech. So Henk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for joining. I tried to use the session background, but I totally failed on technical issues. Security, peace, water, energy and food are critically connected. And as experts in this panel, I think you all know, but in my role as special envoy, I work around the world, often in places where competition over natural resources sparks conflict or at least disputes. And water, food and energy are critically connected in that. Water-related impacts are enlarged also thanks to climate change. So that means that the impact on our environment, on our economy and societies, with droughts, sea level rise, floods, but also the impact on hydropower, energy crops, and so forth is only increasing. And with that, it impacts vested interest. And those could be political, societal, economic, and by this battle over resources, we find more vulnerability already in the places that are vulnerable. So it's not to say that water scarcity or floods that cause seasonal or even continuous migration is sparking a conflict, but in our current times, in our current world, the stacking of crises, food insecurity, energy insecurity, water challenges, climate change, terrorism, transboundary conflicts or tensions, in this stacking of crises. Every crisis can be the push over the border and turn a vulnerable situation into a disastrous situation. Conditions on governance, on demographics, on conflicts in surrounding areas, on inequalities and discrimination, on a history, availability of those resources, then help spark what is already vulnerable. So you could say, as we used to say from an economic point of view, strengthen what is already strong. In our current vulnerable situation the world is, what's already weak and interdependent only becomes weaker because of this stacking of the crisis. And we see it now with the pandemic. It's not in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not in the places where the pandemic is the final push for disaster situation that the population also is more vulnerable. No, it is just the last push over the ridge, you could say. Now, focusing again on this session, and I'll stop. Organizing yourselves around that complex interdependency is critically important. So, and that comes with understanding first. So the vulnerabilities increase because of this complexity and this stacking of crises. But a good understanding of that vulnerability, those interdependencies and opportunities, helps create an opportunity to start to value not only in a siloed, vested interest, single-focused way, but in a more sustainable, holistic, comprehensive, and my words, across the Sustainable Development Goals. And when you get to this level of organizing around understanding and valuing, then the third step is indeed that you can organize outside of the actors and sectors that have their own interest, but in a far more collaborative way. So a holistic, integrated approach also is a very inclusive one that can help build sustainability, but that starts with understanding, facing that complexity in the eye. I stop here is a short introduction, also stressing the importance of the Water, Peace and Security Initiative that focuses on, by understanding, building capacity and an enabling environment that can help undo these vulnerabilities and start to build more security from the perspectives of water, food and energy. Wish you a good session. I will continue to listen in, although I'll have to shut off my camera. Thank you so much to the organizers also for doing this. And I look forward not only to listen to the presentations, but to connect with you in the, well, once we ever are able to get in the field again to build more security around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henk, for these introductory words. And thank you for especially stressing the need to actually understand what the linkage is between water, energy, food security, or in many places insecurity, and competition, conflict, instability in many regions actually are. And this brings us right to the first presentation that we'll have in our session today. Because in order to understand these linkages and therewith create the basis for action, preferably conflict prevention, but maybe also only conflict mitigation or resolution, in order to create that basis, it is very important to have a full picture of what causes or what triggers or what pushes over the edge vulnerable communities, vulnerable societies. And in order to do that, GIZ, so the German Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, and the Water, Peace and Security Partnership, which is a partnership funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and combining a number of research, think tanks and NGOs, they have partnered in order to develop an approach that allows us to understand these linkages as a basis for action. And Karen Meyer from Deltares also being one of the members of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership, will present to you now what we're up to, what we're doing, and how we're doing that specifically in the Inner Niger Delta in Mali. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne, and good afternoon, everyone. Just to check, do you see the correct presentation now?
Yes.
Thank you. So I will present to you today about the water, peace and security integrated approach and the application of this approach for the Inner Niger Delta in Mali. And sorry, I didn't seem to go to the next slide. Yes, sorry. So the water, peace and security integrated approach integrates both knowledge of water, energy, food systems with knowledge of conflict and peace building. And we do this in two directions. So on the one hand, we're looking at conflicts and the potential links they may have with water. So we try to bring knowledge into conflict analysis. And at the same time, we're looking at potential conflicts that could arise from changes in water resources management. So we're also working on making water management more conflict sensitive. But in addition to integrating knowledge, we're also working on integrating knowledge into policy and practice to really facilitate that decisions are made more timely and more effectively. And we do this by doing our analysis in a participatory way, by focusing on possible actions. So we use the information not just to understand the system, but to identify possible actions to reduce risks. And we make results available in interactive and easy to understand dashboards so that stakeholders can really themselves use the information in their discussions and decision-making processes. And we believe that by working in such a way, we are already contributing to capacity development, but where needed, we are also organizing specific trainings. And we are applying this approach in several regions, and the region that we started our work is in Mali. And what you see in this map is a map of the entire Niger catchment, and we are focusing on the upper Niger catchment, which is largely based in Mali, with small ports in upstream countries, Guinea, Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso. And the downstream end of the upper Niger catchment is the Inner Niger Delta, and this is a 10,000 to 20,000 square kilometer large wetland area that provides ecosystem services on which around 2 million people in that area depend on for their livelihoods. And these are livelihoods based on farming, on fishing, on cattle herding. And these livelihoods and the ecosystem services largely depend on the flow regime of the Niger River. And this flow regime is threatened by upstream abstractions and regulations. There is already a large irrigation area upstream, and this is there are plans to further expand this area. And there are also plans for a new dam in Guinea for hydropower, and that will also affect the flow regime and the magnitude and the timing of the floods that arrive in the Inner Niger Delta. And the Inner Niger Delta, which is located around here in Mali, is already a very insecure area. The circles in this map show the recurrence of violent conflict in the area in 2016, and the violence has further increased over the years since then. And the main conflicts that we are studying are inter-community natural resource related conflicts between herders, farmers and fishermen. And we do not focus specifically on religious extremism or armed militia, but we are aware that the presence of these developments have resulted in conflicts that were already there. They have made them more violent because of the increased presence of guns and firearms. And there are also conflicts between government agencies and communities. And these are largely because communities felt unfairly treated. Communities went to the government because, for example, to complain about cattle theft, but they felt that these complaints were not appropriately dealt with, and they felt the need to arm their own groups or connect with armed groups to be able to continue their way of living and to feel secure. So these are all developments that we're not looking at per se, but that we need to understand if we want to understand the underlying causes of the conflicts in the Inner Niger Delta. And the role that we see for us as Water, Peace and Security Consortium or partnership is to provide information based on data and science, but also information that really responds to the information needs of the actors in the area and that helps them to have a more constructive discussion to understand what is going on and what could be possible alternative options. So we do this through participatory analysis. We've already organized several workshops with stakeholders in Bamako in Mali, and we will continue with this process. And together with those stakeholders, we analyze what triggers violent behavior and how do people respond to a change in availability of natural resources. So the key trigger that we are interested in is the wetland flooding regime. That is the link with water, and we can model how the flooding regime will change when new dams are built or operated in a certain way, or when the irrigation area is expanded. But of course, we recognize that there are other driving forces of human behavior. And together, these driving forces affect the livelihoods opportunities of the people in the Niger Delta, and also the perceptions they have of these livelihood opportunities and whether impacts are equally distributed. And these driving forces also affect the perceptions people have of alternatives for their current livelihoods. And we discussed with the stakeholders what these options were, and we found that there were not so many options. People can further diversify, but that actually means that they will encroach upon the activities of others, leading to more competition for resources. And other options are to join extremist groups or engage in violence, largely for a community's own security, or to supplement income with illegal activities such as drug smuggling, or to leave the inner Niger Delta altogether and migrate to Bamako or out of the country. So these are more or less the different options people have when their current livelihoods are threatened. And together, these perceptions of current livelihoods and alternatives determine or lead to a certain motivation to take action and change behavior. But people can also only do so when they are also able to do so, when they maybe have a network or access to guns, or have family in the city where they can go to. So we think it's very important to understand not only the motivation, but also the ability of the different groups in the area. And this understanding can help to identify possible actions and their effectiveness, and give insight in whether not having a dam or operating a dam in a different way will actually reduce conflict risks, or that it would be needed to provide access to finance or training to allow people to undertake different livelihoods activities that are maybe not directly related to the wetlands. Or perhaps solutions should be sought more in governance and reinstating law enforcement in the area, which would make illegal and violent activities less attractive to people. Or perhaps the perceptions that people have can be altered, because they may not always be fully correct perceptions of the reality. So this is the type of analysis that we are doing and that we will continue to do and further quantify as well. And we will make those results available through a dashboard that is still under development, and that will really be linked to the questions that the stakeholders in Mali ask us, and that will allow them to, through an interactive tool, identify what the different options are and how they will affect the livelihoods of people in the Delta and the availability of energy and food. So some first insights that we got from this first year and a half that we worked on this topic in Mali is that unfair access to natural resources is one of the factors causing conflict. We also found that participatory analysis of human responses increases our understanding, but also the understanding of the stakeholders themselves of how and why this is happening. Through the modeling that we did, we found that a combination of a new dam with an expansion of irrigation could reduce annual flooding of the inner Niger Delta with 10 to 20%. And that will reduce the basis for the livelihoods, but also the supply of food from the inner Niger Delta to the wider area in Mali and perhaps other countries. So therefore, a water, energy, food perspective at actor group level is needed to make a more balanced and conflict-sensitive trade-off. And based on this, we expect that it will be needed to adjust plans, or at least complementing with other measures, such as alternative livelihood options or reinstating the rule of law, to prevent that these developments will further increase the conflict risks. So as some next steps, we will expand the analysis that we've been doing with more information on energy and food within the framework of GIZ's Nexus project on improving security and climate resilience in fragile contexts through the water, energy, food security nexus. And in this analysis, we will pay attention to overall trade-offs, but also especially to how these impacts, the benefits and the negative impacts are distributed over groups, because it's this inequality in distribution that can be an important factor that results in conflict. And we will further develop the dashboard and the underlying tools and analysis to support to support discussions with information. And this is the application in Mali. We plan to replicate this approach in other areas, and we will do so at least in Niger, Chad, Iraq, and East Africa in the coming years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Karen, for sharing with us some of the work that the Water, Peace and Security Partnership together with GIZ is undertaking currently to better understand how changes in water security, in food security and in energy security actually impacts on human behavior, what choices people also have to respond to these challenges, and what options policymakers in the affected countries, in the affected communities, but also among the international community have to respond to these challenges and to ensure peace and stability and turn water, energy and food into a resource of peace instead of an origin or a threat multiplier for conflict. And with that, I'd like to open our discussion a little bit more here, inviting the other panelists to join me now. Let me briefly introduce them to you first before we jump into the discussion with all of you. You've heard Henk Ovink, the Dutch water envoy, speak already. He'll be with us on the panel, but he'll be also joined by Catherine Wong. Catherine works for UNDP, but also represents UNDP in the climate security mechanism, which really is one of, if not the mechanism at the global level in the international community that tries to bring climate security, water security, and the hardcore security side together. Talking about the hardcore security side, we also have Michelle Rademacher joining us today. Michelle is the Deputy Director of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, based here together with me in The Hague in the Netherlands. And he has been working on the topic of security a lot in the context of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership as well, so bringing a bit of a different perspective today. We also have Dr. Rali Ahmed, who comes from the Lake Chad Basin Commission. As you all know, a region, a basin that is suffering from water scarcity, that is suffering from various aspects of food insecurity, energy insecurity, but also insecurity in terms of conflict, violent extremism. So he'll be sharing his ideas on that. And then last but not least, we also have Dr. Kaveh Madani joining us today. He is a senior fellow at Yale University, but some of you might also know him as the former deputy head of the Department of Environment of Iran. And I'd also like to invite him first to share his thoughts with us, because we've now heard a bit about Mali. We'll later be hearing about Lake Chad. So we've been focusing on the Sahel quite a bit, but we know that the MENA region is also highly affected by water, energy and food insecurity. And we'd like to hear from you, Kaveh. What are the challenges when it comes to food, to energy and to water security in Iran? And how does that affect the overall development of the country, the stability of the country, the overall future of the country? Please share some of your thoughts, Kaveh. We cannot hear you in case you...
Wow.
Yes, no.
Thank you, Sudan, for the invitation. It's a great session already. I say hi to those people who are joining us from different parts of the world. I think, unfortunately, we are still dealing with COVID-19 and we are losing people around the world and economies are going down. There would be downstream effects, lots of crises to deal with still. But when it comes to explaining the concept of nexus, environmental security and complexity, our life is much easier as instructors, as activists, as policymakers from now on. COVID-19 is telling us how a crisis in part of the system or a driver in part of a system can create chaos and problems in other parts of the system. It all started with one wire, with the virus, but now we're seeing problems with economies. We see food crisis. We see lots of other things in other sectors. So the nexus of food, water, energy, environment, economy, etc., is real, and now we understand it more than before. MENA is different from many parts of the world because in some of the, at least the rich MENA countries, Middle East and North Africa, energy insecurity per se is not a problem. Actually, energy abundance is the cause of many problems in the region because energy has given the nations of the developing world, the MENA, the confidence to go ahead and develop. They have been given a natural resource, or some fossil resources that they inherited from their ancestors to develop their countries, to sell it globally and make money, and through that money they go ahead. So that, to understand the context, we have to understand this how discovery of oil and natural gas has impacted the development of these countries in the region. Iran is no exception. With oil money came the dream of developing a country, building infrastructure, and going ahead. In doing so, the thought, like many other parts of the world during the development phase, was to harness water, harness water through building infrastructure like dams, reservoirs, expanding the irrigation network, because it's not possible to do rain-fed agriculture the whole time in the whole country, to go ahead and do things. When it comes to drinking water is not a big concern for Iran. Almost 100% of the urban population, 70% of the nation, has access to clean network water. It's clean, it's treated. When it comes to rural areas, the situation is a little worse, like many other parts of the country. But water in the Middle East, something to understand, and the rest of the world overall is in the hands of the farmers and the agricultural sector. In Iran, because of its climatic condition, 90% of water goes into the agricultural sector. 90% of the water is a big amount. The dream for many Middle Eastern leaders as well as nations have been to become food secure, like the Europeans. The Europeans have been thinking about becoming energy secure. They didn't have the problem of food insecurity because of the abundance of water. Now go to Middle East, the situation is different. There is abundance of energy, but lack of water, or water shortage in some places. And then food insecurity becomes an issue. So many of the leaders wanted to become food self-sufficient, or even food exporter. Saudi Arabia at some point became a food exporter, or a wheat exporter in 90s. Iran also has a history of having conflicts with the rest of the world, being under pressure, going under sanctions, having a revolution that they wanted to defend and protect. So the food self-sufficiency became a big dream for the leaders and for the nation. So if you want to irrigate, if you want to farm, you have to irrigate, and if you irrigate, you eventually run out of water unless you come up with efficient plan, and which is not the case in Iran. So we have a lot of inefficiencies in the agricultural sector, which uses a lot of water. So energy is cheap. You subsidize it. You give it to farmers. Farmers farm through using surface water and groundwater. When surface water goes down with more development, population growth, Iran's population grew in a matter of 2 decades after the revolution of 1979. Iran's population doubled. So that comes with pressure on natural resources. So you irrigate, you farm, you run out of water. So you go after your groundwater. Groundwater keeps going down. You need energy to pump it. So government is giving you energy for, at a cheap price, pumping water out of the ground is not a problem. Government keeps giving you more and more subsidies. The groundwater goes down, energy use goes up, but the government gets locked into this situation. What do? Do you give up on your food self-sufficiency or food security plans at a time that you're under sanctions and you have all other problems? Because we understand that food and water and environment must be run based on, you know, thinking about interconnectivity with the rest of the world, but you have these issues. Then you have, most importantly, an issue of political economy, because you're down the road, when you were developing your country and your economy, you didn't think about the fact that you're putting the oil money, the energy money into the agricultural sector through subsidies. So you're providing things at a cheap price, the systems become inefficient, and then the farmers become more and more reliant on the energy subsidies that you pay or water subsidies you pay. Now you have a sector which involves about 30% of the population, and they have their jobs and lives connected to that. So with shortage, with drought comes conflicts, comes problems, comes, you know, unemployment, migration, and so on. And then what do? When you have a drought, you also have to take care of your wetlands. We hear about Lake Chad later on, but the problems that we have is wetlands are going dry. Then we have dust storms. With dust storms, you have all sorts of problems, insecurity, and so on. But the main problem here is that your political economy is connected to water, and you get locked and you can't get out of this situation because jobs and unemployment becomes a problem. And if you want to solve that, you have to do something about your economy, create opportunities in other sectors. Iran can produce more food with less water and less people involved in the agricultural sector if it fixes its economy, it does things in other sectors, and it provides alternative jobs. But with the current situation, with the resources draining more and more, with the sanctions and the, you know, dreams of the leaders, the economy is becoming tighter. The capacity to respond and adapt becomes, you know, smaller and smaller. So you see the situation of hitting the brick wall, and unfortunately we have to wait for one crisis after another. Dust storms, fires, floods, droughts, all these things come together, and you see what is happening in Iran right now, despite the richness that we talk about, even in terms of GDP and in terms of the amount of money that the country has access to. But once they're locked in this situation, the system gets bad, and with all of these problems comes national insecurity problems, human insecurity problems, and so on, that I can talk about later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaveh. I think we agree that Iran is definitely a country to watch in the future when it comes to water, energy, and food resources, and their potential implications for not only economic development, but as you said, also national security. I'd like to move a little bit more to the southwest and look at Lake Chad. I had said already, Lake Chad is also a basin, a region that has received a lot of attention in the past years when it comes to especially water scarcity, all the debates around the shrinking of the lake, but unfortunately also a lot of attention from the security side, thinking about the rise of Boko Haram, the violent conflicts in the regions. So I would like to invite Dr. Ghali from the Lake Chad Basin Commission, who's joining us today, to share in 2 to 3 minutes his thoughts on the current situation in the Lake Chad Basin with regards to water, food, and energy, as well as security. Dr. Ghali, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, Suzanne.
Yes, we hear you very well.
You hear me clearly, right?
Yes, very clearly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You know, originally Lake Chad has an area of 2,381,663 kilometers square mile, and it has reduced from that 2 million to 966,955 within a couple of years. It started shrinking. In 1963, the Lake Chad shrunk for below 25,000, and in 2010 we are now having Lake Chad in less than 2 million kilometers. cubic of water. So this tells you the drastic drying up of Lake Chad, which has its own serious economic crisis for over 30 million inhabitants in the Lake Chad environment. Imagine how will they survive? The herdsmen, the herders, the fishermen, as well as the farmers. So automatically, water is supposed to be a source of building bridges rather than making conflicts. But the drying up of Lake Chad has really caused a lot of crisis in the region. Coupled with that, there have also been lack of investment in the rural areas in these places, like roads, hospitals for the communities, and also the government present, like police stations to maintain peace and security in the environment, are not available in this area. So there have been skirmish of conflict here and there. Before the advent of Boko Haram in 2009, and Boko Haram seized the opportunity of the vacuum of the government in this area to establish their holds in the Lake Chad. Automatically, we have a serious security problem since 2009 till date. Definitely, no serious investment has taken place in the Lake Chad axis, and there have not been any functioning economic activities in that area. Poverty has quadrupled among the 30 million inhabitants here. Crime has increased. Other social vices has equally increased. And there have been migration left and right between Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and other countries that are surrounding Central Africa and Western African nations. And equally contributed to the drying up of Lake Chad Basin is that Libyan crisis. The Libyan crisis and the aftermath of the death of Gaddafi further complicated the issue of Lake Chad Basin issues. So migration were left and right and uncontrollable indeed. And security, of course, is a major challenges in this area. The governing government, they have succeeded to bring about regional military government called Multinational Joint Task Force. Multinational Joint Task Force, they've tried all the necessary mechanism to reconcile with the community, bringing peace among the villagers and the like. And at the same time, the Boko Haram has equally frustrated most efforts of the Multinational Joint Task Force, because without security, you will never have any meaningful economic activities in the Lake Chad Basin. On the other side, you have the Lake Fitri. Lake Fitri is in the northeastern part of Chad. Is about 50,000 kilometers area, and is a very rich environment. Economic activities is taking place, but it suffers for two main reasons. One, drought. Whenever there is a drought, there is economic crisis among the villagers there. So the conflict is enormous. And two, you have issue of flood in the environment, because when you have excessive rainfall, you have a lot of flood, and it affects the livestock and their farming environment. So these two things can be ironed out. Investment is needed in this area. One is we need infrastructure in the Lake Fitri area to bring about preservative process in respect to food, because if you don't have a food, the crisis is unthinkable. You have a lot of crisis. People do any other things to survive, food in particular. because of this inaccessibility to water. So in order to have this water, the solutions is to have some reservation of dams, irrespective of the quantity of the dam, is very important because of the drought era. And two, infrastructures are needed to be invested in this area to minimize the loss of economic wealth in that environment, especially in agricultural produce and the livestock in particular. Chad is a very rich country in respect to agriculture. It's very rich. But to sustain this agriculture, education is needed to be given. That means enlightenment. This community needs enlightenment, and it has to be done urgently, and their life will be meaningful. They need enlightenment on how to go about their agricultural produce. Livestock, the same thing, because between the farmers and the herders, there are always conflicts. 24/7, there are always conflicts, because the herders go to the farms and rear their animals, and they eat the food planted in those areas. 0 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. I think that the 3 minutes you gave me has exhausted. Suzanne, I thank you very much for this opportunity. There is a lot to be said in respect to Lake Chad and Lake Fitri for food, water, and energy Nexus project. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghali. That was really insightful. And at least in the water, in the food, and in the energy community, I think we're all aware of the challenges that the entire Sahel, but especially also the Lake Chad region, is facing when it comes to these issues. What I find interesting, though, is only in the past years, the security community has really picked up on that topic. And in the security community, we now see something that I personally sometimes perceive as a bit of a parallel discussion when it comes to climate security and water security. So I'd like to turn to someone who can share some ideas with us on that. I'd like to turn to Michel Rademacher from the Hague Center of Strategic Studies. I'd like to know from you, Michel, how did the security community get to these water, energy, and food security nexus topics? And what solutions are being discussed in the security community that might sound different to you than the ones that you've just heard, for example, from Dr. Ghali, that came from a water management, food management perspective? Michel.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for the opportunity. Yeah, I think you stated it correctly that the security community at this point in time is waking up on the issue of climate security. There's a bit of hesitation, although, because the traditional military, let's state it like that, think that they are not for security of climate or safety of climate issues. And they already sometimes feel burdened by the other kind of events that they have to respond to. But at the same time, there's a growing awareness, and you might have heard of the international community of military on climate security, IMCCS, that is being formulated some 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and now already represents some 30 to 40 countries with high representatives even on chief of defense level that are at least ambassadors to create awareness among their communities what climate security entails, and especially because there's a growing insight that climate security is a root cause of conflicts. So that means when you're as a military involved in conflicts and you do not really understand enough the root causes, you probably also apply some of the measures that might not be so well placed. On the other hand, I think that's also an important aspect, is that there might be some capabilities that the military have that could come in place to help out in climate security. Maybe later on we can address those a bit further. But I think the most important observation at this moment is that the understanding of what food, water and security nexus and the abbreviation of those elements entails is sinking in the military. And so, for example, one of the things that I think the military should better understand than they do so far is that in their intelligence gathering, they have to dive deeper into the climate nexus, the climate security nexus. And I think that's where the Water Peace Security project comes in really timely, because there's a need to really understand the nexus. So maybe as a statement ahead. So if you, when preparing this, asked, okay, what could be done on the decision making level, try to involve the security community, the security and military institutions, and let them show some leadership also, because they have capabilities that might be of use. That maybe is as a statement for this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. That was very interesting. And you mentioned that indeed in the security community, this topic is increasingly becoming important. But you also said that it's sometimes difficult to mobilize the right people beyond, let's say, the converted, or beyond preaching to the converted in the water, energy and food sectors already. And I think we've seen something similar in the UN in the past years, where, of course, specific UN agencies, specific UN programs have been working on water topics, on climate topics, and so on. But the UN Security Council and other high-level bodies of the UN have only very lately picked up on that topic. So I'd like to turn to Catherine Wong from UNDP, also representing the Climate Security Mechanism, to shed some light on these developments. Catherine, what has been happening over the past year when it comes to, or the past years actually, when it comes to water, energy, food, and the linkages to hard security, which are at the heart of the Security Council?
Thanks so much, Suzanne, and thank you to Special Envoy Henk Vinke and to the experts and panelists for the excellent discussion and very interesting perspectives so far. I think definitely, when we're talking about water security, food and energy security as well, we cannot have this discussion without taking into account the impacts of climate change. And there's a much greater understanding today, more so than ever, of the interdependence of natural capital and human security, and how the fragility of natural systems can impact on socio-economic ones and vice versa. And I think Michel's comments about the climate security nexus are very timely when we think, for example, about the latest statistics from the Institute of Economics and Peace which show that around 1 billion people around the world are very highly exposed to climate change, and of those, some 400 million are also exposed to low levels of peacefulness, that is to say, conflict. And as you alluded to, Suzanne, it's a challenge to make these issues a priority and to achieve coherence at the policy level as well, particularly when, I guess, offering perspective from the UN side, we have data, we have expertise, but these are often, I guess, found among different UN agencies, funds, and programs. And so the challenge really is how to try to bridge these intra and inter-organizational silos. And I think an important first step by the UN has been the creation of the climate security mechanism to establish an integrated approach and institutional home to try to support the UN and its partners to deliver on integrated approaches to climate-related security risks. Under the climate security mechanism, UNDP is working very closely with DPPA and also UNEP and another 20 UN partners to try to develop and implement a conceptual approach and toolbox for the integrated analysis and assessment of climate-related security risks, in order to strengthen the evidence base of management and response strategies, as Michel mentioned as well. Many peace and security actors are still trying to understand what climate change means in terms of their mandates and their capacities on the ground. In terms of affecting change at a policy level, this, I think, really means working in different tracks. And you know, in terms of what we are doing as a climate security mechanism, DPPA, the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, leads in its role backstopping the Security Council and also the Special Political Missions and Peace Operations. UNEP leverages its capacities for environmental data and analytics, and UNDP, with its presence on the ground in 170 countries, and also is the largest implementer of climate action, international waters and sustaining peace, and the Peace Building Fund within the UN system plays a role in helping to mainstream. And we definitely see opportunities that we can pursue together and in coordination on these different tracks at the political level, in terms of how we can better mainstream and improve conflict prevention and peace-building efforts to ensure a lens on water, food and security, and then also to ensure that that climate action is more conflict sensitive, and try to deliver, I guess, an integrated approach to climate action and peace building on the ground in fragile and conflict affected states.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for sharing that perspective from the UN level, which is certainly the top level of the international community, where attention needs to be raised, awareness needs to be established, in order to make a change, in order to also moving from understanding, which I think is growing at the UN level, to also implementing integrated action that, as you said, brings together the hardcore security community with those already either working on environmental data, such as UNEP, or implementing programs of different sort on the ground. I'd like to move from the global UN level a level down to the regional level again, and I'd like to again turn to Dr. Ghali from the Lake Chad Basin Commission with a follow-up question. Could you share some insights with us on what the Lake Chad Basin Commission, as the Basin Commission that is charged, interestingly, with both managing waters, but also with hosting the multinational joint task force, what you are doing in order to address these water-related security challenges in the Lake Chad Basin? Dr. Ghali.
Thank you for having me, Susan. On water issue, there have been a lot of brainstorming in respect of recharging the Lake Chad. We've looked on several options. One, to draw water from River Ubangi, that is Democratic Republic of Congo, which is about 2,500,000 kilometers from here. And we look at other options also, options like taking water from River Benue and River Niger to reduce the flooding of these two rivers in down south Nigeria side that have been causing a lot of serious economic havoc on people's residents there. Then the third option is to look at taking water from Nubian sandstone aquifer, which has over 2 million cubic kilometer of water. And Gaddafi did a lot of activities in that area, where it happens to draw water from that side, that's Nubian sandstone aquifer system. And annually, the Libyan community feed 2.4 kilometers of water from that area. And the water there is fossil, it's a fresh water, and is quite very unpolluted, rather. It recharges itself naturally. It has been in existence for the past 5,000 years in that area. That is a possibility of doing such a project, but it is more economically and cost effective. Because look at the cost we have seen that the drawing water from Ubangi River will cost nothing less than $70 billion. And taking water within Nubian sandstone here wouldn't reach such amount. We'll be marking something around that $5 to $20 billion in this respect, because it has to be pipe it underground to draw the water because of to preserve the environment, the climate, and the like, and take many situations of environmental degradation and desertification into considerations, and also to minimize pollutions of the environment and the like. And Chad, Sudan, Egypt, and Libya are member countries of Nubia Sandstone Aquifer System Organization. It will reduce political frictions, and diplomatically, it will give us a good result. The Niger, River Niger, and River Benue also will give us a better option, which is option 2, aside from option 1 of a Nubia Sandstone, to reduce flooding Nigerian community in the down south environment of the Nigeria. On the other hand, in respect to security, the multinational joint fund has taken a lot of diplomatic and dialogue situation with the environment community. For the past 1.5 years, we have been having peace in the environment, although meaningful activities has not taken place, because Boko Haram are still very active in Sambisa, in Borno State side, northeast Nigeria. They go in and they have some element of hit and run games they are doing within the Lake Chad Basin area. Recently, the governor of Borno State was attacked. Thank God. The security has not that much given a lot of ways to carry out any meaningful activities in that area.
Thank you very much for sharing these additional details. It's really interesting to know what's happening in the different regions, what's going on the ground, and how the different actors, such as, for example, a basin organization that was originally set up to manage water resources, is broadening its focus and trying to really link water, energy, food, but also the security dimension. But I think we all know here, also with the audience, that there are still quite a few silos to break, and still more often than not, the water sector thinks as the water sector, the energy sector thinks as the energy sector, and in particular, and Kaveh Madani has mentioned that earlier, the agricultural sector tends to think as the agricultural sector. So I'd like to turn back to you, Kaveh, and ask you for your experiences, but also your wishes and your thoughts on how to break these silos. Can you unmute yourself, Kaveh?
This is a billion-dollar question. How to break the silos, and I think, as we proceed, we will realize that how much we don't know, and we still have to deal with more and more complexities and push the boundaries. So, the very first, you mentioned understanding. So our understanding is growing. I think this is something very important. We should, at the same time, we shouldn't be too overconfident that we understand the problems really well. We define the problems very well. Still, even in academia, which is supposed to be ahead of the curve, we are dealing with these problems in silos. So imagine how policymakers operate, how societies understand these problems. So one of my wishes is that we, at least in academia, start going beyond buzzwords and just inventing terms. We need to also, you said action. We need actions in academia when it comes to understanding and developing narratives. The other thing to understand is when we went, today we had talks about regions. When we went to Lake Chad, we went to Iran, the problems were different. Each place has its own specifications. The idea that we can come up with a universal solution for the complex problems is wrong. Another thing is that complexity, with complexity comes, this requirement that the very first thing you need to understand when you deal with complex problems is that there is no solution whatsoever. All we can do is to learn how to navigate through complexities, address trade-offs, understand trade-offs, and so on. All we can do is to understand, to try to find solutions that can benefit countries and regions in the short term and make them in line with their long-term benefits. So if I want to do something for Iran's water, the very first thing I need to understand is that we have farmers who need job, who need income, and if I can find good jobs and if I can empower them, then I can have hopes for better management of water, better production of food, and reduction in energy use. Unless I do that, I cannot solve the problem, and no policymaker would dare to raise the energy price or raise the water price to solve the problem through economic markets, something that we a lot of times suggest in academia, or like we sit in the West or the global North and prescribe for the global South. So we have to find solutions that can, or strategies that can immediately benefit these nations and these countries. If you want to help Iran reduce its emissions, you also have to come up with strategies or definition of benefits for pollution reduction, for better health, and so on. So these countries have incentives to do these things within the country, and that's another thing. Now I'm talking about the whole nation, but within the countries we also have a lot of opportunities, and this is something that we shouldn't miss. We heard already stories from other presenters. One thing to note is that we need a combination of top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches, top-down pressure and bottom-up solutions, bottom-up activities with communities. So this is something that we often forget. We keep talking about the big changes and asking the policymakers to implement reforms, and we forget and we miss and we overlook lots of small opportunities about, around the Nexus idea, lots of things that we can do within communities, within smaller regions to address these problems. Work on a village, try to fix these problems and address these problems in that village. And once you do it for that village, you can do it for the next. And once the government see your success, their mentalities would change. Your society also changes its mentality. We also, as solution proposers, can develop confidence and understand what's wrong with our solutions before going to implement things at the larger scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kaveh Madani, for these thoughts. Indeed, there are quite a few silos still to break. I tend to take a more, or maybe not a more positive, but a rather positive approach, thinking that when it comes to food, energy, and water, we actually managed to maybe not break, but to get some silos a little bit thinner, to make these communities talk to each other, develop joint solutions. But I'd like to hear from Michel Rademacher. What's the security community doing to break down silos? Or could we say, just playing devil's advocate here, could we say that the security community, with its discussion on climate security and water security, is currently building its own silo? What do you think? Can you unmute yourself, Michel? You still have to unmute yourself. I can't hear you. You look unmuted to me. That is a shame. Let's just turn it around. I'll give you 2-3 minutes to figure that out. Just jump in when you can. Let's ask the same or a similar question to Catherine. Isn't, maybe also to ask in a bit of a provocative way, is what's happening at the UN level, is the fact that the UN Security Council is increasingly focusing on climate change, is that maybe also securitizing, politicizing issues instead of truly getting rid of silos?
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for asking the difficult questions, the questions that we need to ask and also try to answer. It's interesting actually, because I think the Security Council has been a really important reference point for climate security within the UN system and has played an important role in shaping this agenda as well. And when we're talking about climate change and natural resources, often we get to the subject of disaster risks, of economic losses and damages, but climate change does, through various different channels and mechanisms, have impacts on peace and security. And when we talk about such climate-related security risks, this does imply a different set of capabilities, institutional responses, and actors who also are on the front lines and do need to be prepared, to be ready to respond, and to have the data and empirics at their fingertips that they need to inform their responses. And you know, the Council in recent years has acknowledged the impacts of climate change on stability in various different mandates and resolutions. This includes in the Chad Basin, in Mali, Darfur, Central Africa, among others. And it's important to avoid securitizing this debate, and to do so, I mean, we cannot underestimate the importance of the language and the framing, ensuring that we're being inclusive, and that often when we talk about security, it's security of whom and from what, and we really need to avoid stigmatizing here groups that are already vulnerable and marginalized. And so in this regard, when we talk about climate-related security risks or the climate security nexus, we are, given I think the very enlightening discussion that we've had today as well, we are talking about the maintenance of international peace and security according to the United Nations Charter. But beyond this, also national security, as sea level rise threatens permanent inundation of small island developing states. So we have an existential threat that we need to think about and impacts on sovereignty and potential governments in exile. But beyond that, human security. So I think climate security really does challenge kind of traditional notions and concepts of security and the kind of responses that we need to address them. And obviously we know with regards to climate change, but also water and energy security, these solutions come from, the best solutions are prevention oriented. They come from a human security or sustainable development perspective. And I think when we look at the Security Council, but beyond that, in member states, at the group of friends on climate security, which is now more than 50 member states strong, the call really is for better data and empirics to have informed responses. This includes a biannual report to serve as an early warning system on climate security, to have a special envoy. When we're talking about conflict, that we you know, in the long term, I mean, the conflict cycle, we need to think about integrated prevention and resilience. But when we have outbreaks of conflict, we need to think about mediation and good offices and how to reach a resolution. The Security Council is also looking at establishing an informal experts group, again, to help anchor climate security analysis into the work of the Council. So the focus really is on early warning for early action, good offices, mediation, and ultimately an integrated focus on prevention and resilience. And this has to include development, humanitarian, and peace and security actors.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Michelle, can we try whether we can hear you, and then say something again? No. That's always the perks of technology. It's always one in an online conference that has trouble. I'm really sorry that it's you today, but I hope you stay with us. I'd like to rephrase the question a little bit for Henk Ovink, not because Henk represents the security sector, but because Henk has worked with pretty much everyone from pretty much every sector. So I'm sure, Henk, you also have some ideas of how to overcome silos that exist not only between water, energy, and food, but especially also with diplomats, with the foreign policy sector, and especially with the security sector. Henk.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, silos. Overcoming silos is critical important. When we drafted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the SDGs and the Paris Agreement in 2015, it was all about crossing silos and an integrated approach and an inclusive approach. But that is not easy. Finding common ground in a world that is based on vested interests and single focused approaches is critical important, but not easy. And we see it now in the current situation of the pandemic, is that the relief, of course, is often band-aid, but the recovery is very short-sighted, single-focused, and based on replicating the past. So I have a little bit of a dark view there, I'm sorry. But what is amazing of this Nexus is that by bringing the opportunities of this integration of water, food, and energy to the table, it is also possible by collaboration to show the added value of investing in water, food, and energy. And this is a more value-based approach than a direct profit-based approach or a single-focused approach. That is indeed a little bit more complex. Demands, again, this full understanding, valuing across the full scheme of the SDGs, or in the case of the Nexus, at least the full Nexus of water, food, and energy, and bringing in a collaborative process where the interests of all can be matched to secure that the added values come out. But this demands time. Because I'll take water, I'm a water envoy. If you invest in water, health costs go down, but not immediately. If you invest in water, security goes up, gender opportunities go up, education access goes up, but not immediately. Investing in one sector actually pays off across all the SDGs or in the Nexus, across the Nexus. But for that you need time. So broadening the scope in a value-based approach is critically important. Taking time to capture these returns, softer and harder on these investments is critically important. And therefore building trust, building an enabling environment, investing in people, in institutions is critically important too. So the process helps bring all stakeholders together or keep them together while the returns will take a little bit longer. Last, then I stop. The Nexus is ideal to showcase these returns sometimes a little bit faster, so to keep the trust. And therefore, because it's very practical. The Nexus of water, food, and energy, by building capacity, understanding, and investing in projects, smaller scale projects, already showcase, therefore build trust, those returns. While the full agenda is much bigger and more complex, I think this collaboration in this Nexus help. Perhaps last, inclusion is easy said, and it's collaboration and inclusion are words. I say it now 10 times in my talk. It's so hard to do on the ground. But you have to believe in it and stick to it. And communities, individuals, the non-institutional and informal world, youth, women can really help drive inclusion and collaboration forward in such a process. And we often jump to institutional approaches a little bit too fast. And while needed, the informal parallel process of collaboration can help inform institutional reform. And I think with that, indigenous community capacity is critically important too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henk. I'd like to turn to some of the questions that we received from the audience. And I'd maybe quickly start with Karen, because there were also some questions that concerned your presentation and the Water, Peace and Security Partnership approach that we're taking to assessing these linkages and suggesting the way ahead. One question concerned the role of ecosystems, the role of environment. So we all know it's not only the water, energy, food, but also the water, energy, food and ecosystem nexus. So if you could briefly elaborate on how the work that we're doing in the Water, Peace and Security Partnership brings the environment in. And the other question related to perceptions of local stakeholders. So you mentioned that one option might be to alter the perceptions of stakeholders, what potential solutions might be as an entry point to actually prevent or mitigate conflict. Can you elaborate a bit more on that as well, Karen?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Maybe to start with the latter. It may sound a little bit manipulative to say we will alter the perceptions, but what I meant is that in a report by UN and World Bank, I think it's 2018, Pathways to Peace, it was mentioned how important perceptions are, perceptions of inequality in mobilizing violent behavior. And these perceptions may be correct, but it turns out that often these perceptions are not fully correct, and they are kind of enhanced through social media, through online or WhatsApp groups, people discussing within their own bubble that changes are unequal, why they may actually not be unequal. So I think it's very important that it's monitored how people feel about different changes and where those perceptions are not based on facts and we can prove that they are wrong and that things are not as unequal as they may seem. It may also alter their view of well, maybe grievances they have towards others. So this is what I meant there. And then the ecosystem part, of course, within water, peace and security, we focus on human behavior and not directly on ecosystem conservation, but we see that both in Mali and also in Iraq where we work, and I think in other areas, the livelihoods of people are very strongly related to healthy ecosystems. In Mali, it's clear the full livelihood basis comes from ecosystem services, but also in Iraq, we saw that water quality issues due to water shortage and poor water management resulted in social unrest and migration. So in everything we do, we try to understand what the root causes are, what is important for people's well-being, for their health and their physical security, and we consider ecosystems as an integral part of that. So we will always address it where it has a clear link with how people behave. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Karen. Also, just as a reminder to all of you who are interested in more details, just check out the waterpeacesecurity.org website, and there you'll find either the answers to your questions when it comes to the models that we develop or the contact email address to ask your questions. But I'd like to address a few more questions that came in from the audience. And I have one that I think Kaveh Madani might be the right person to answer, but please, everyone else also jump in if you want to contribute to it. So the question was, how can one escape the trap of food self-sufficiency and the effects that it has on, for example, groundwater over-abstraction? Because raising food prices, as we've seen in many countries, Iraq, Iran, Syria, can itself then be a source of conflict. So it might not be very favorable with governments to increase food prices or to increase water prices or to get rid of subsidies for electricity that help pumping because of the social and political implications. So what else to do?
All of a sudden I have a gardener coming into the yard. Hopefully the background noise is not bothering you. So with the understanding of nexus and interdependence, we also understand that self-sufficiency is not the way to go. There is difference between self-sufficiency and security. So food self-sufficiency and food security are two different things. Smart minds, smart leaders understand that we have interconnections. You cannot build brick walls around your nation. You have an interconnected country with the rest of the world. Energy, water, food, environmental matters, economic production, all of these things can be traded. So you can also work on what you're strong in the global market and try to do trades. Now, for that, if you want to be food secure, you also need good diplomacy, good relationship with the rest of the world, and security. And you have to also watch out and be careful about where you can get abused, because we have leaders, as we saw during the pandemics, which can take advantage of situations, you know, when it comes to trading masks and medical equipment, and now the vaccination and so on. But good governments, the governments which are good players in the world, can keep their good relations with the rest of the world and work on trades in a peaceful environment. Food self-sufficiency just makes your development path unsustainable, wherever you are, especially if you are living in a drier nation. Sell good things and buy the things that you need. That's the way to go.
Yes, thanks, Kaveh. I think it also, in that respect, comes to valuing the resources that we have, water, energy, and food resources, valuing them not only, and maybe not necessarily in economic terms, but also valuing them in their role that they play for social cohesion, for socioeconomic development, and so on. And valuing water brings me very, very briefly only back to you, Henk. Is valuing the resources that we have and valuing the interlinkages between them in the context of the Nexus a way forward to promote peace and security?
Yes, a way. It's not the only way, but valuing definitely helps. When I was a Sherpa to the high-level panel on water, one of the 3 pillars of the panel was how to value water. And we came up with principles, and now, of course, principles don't change the world, I know, but putting them in practice is where we are at right now. And these principles are all about acknowledging the full scale on how you value all aspects of water as a natural resource. So you look across the values of water, not only as we did in the past, the financial economics one, but the economics one, full scale, the societal, cultural, and environmental, critically important. Second, it is also about the protection of the natural resources. Water is a natural resource, but protecting that natural resource is critically important. Third, it's about the process. Inclusion, I said it before. Critical important in how to address all values of water, but investing in that process in an enabling environment, critically important too. Focusing on youth, on gender, and of course also investments across the board of these values. And then that helps launch initiatives. It sparks debates around the world, and also a partnership with the Water, Peace and Security Initiative, actually, where we see it as a journey to explore how valuing water can provoke and inform addressing water, peace and security. We do it with the business sector, with governments from across the world, but also with your own initiative, the Water, Peace and Security Initiative. So it helps us to understand these values, explore and explain them, and make them tangible in a way in the process, and inform all partners, stakeholders, individual and institutional, how to capture these values and work on such an inclusive approach. So it can help, but it's not enough. It's not enough, but it can. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Henk. And thanks also everyone who shared their questions and their thoughts in the chat box. We could spend at least 1 or 2 more hours discussing this. We could be going in very different directions. I think there's a lot more to explore when it comes to understanding the implications of water insecurity or food insecurity or energy insecurity for communities, for individual people, for their human security, but also for broader national or even regional security. There's also a lot more to discuss of how the security sector can actually talk better, and vice versa, of course, to the different natural resources management sectors, and how we can really break these silos. I think there's a lot to discuss also still about the linkages between the global level, what's happening at the UN level in the UN Security Council, and how that all trickles down, but hopefully also really moves up with the community level, and taking into consideration, as was said by one of the panelists, the very different solutions that are needed in each different country or in each different community. But unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the session. I'd, however, encourage you to check out this event website where you'll find more information after the event. And I'd now like to hand over to my colleague from GIZ, Alexandre Mesnier, who has the very hard task to quickly summarize for us today's session, share with us some of the key messages that he drew out of the session, and also share with us a little bit of information on what's the way ahead. Where's the FREXUS, the Fragile Water Energy Food Security Nexus project of GIZ heading, and how will it contribute to making water, energy, and food resources of peace? Alex.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me, all of you? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Thanks, Suzanne. So I will try, because you already started to summarize a bit what we can go home with during the session. I have few messages. I don't want to go into too many details here, but clearly there is the need to have a much more knowledge, understanding of this interlinkage between sectors. This is quite obvious. So many times inclusion was mentioned, breaking the silos, bridges. So within the natural resources sector, water, energy, agriculture, but as well with the security sector, there is a call of Mr. Rademacher. We didn't have a chance to hear much, unfortunately, calling for the natural resources community to involve much more the security community. So that it's very important. The second message, which was coming, we are really on this topic often focusing on a top-down approach. Why the policymaker, what they should do to much more act to prevent and mitigate the potential conflict, but it was as well emphasized to go at a more bottom-up approach, to look more, to understand much more at the local level the perception of the people, which leads to my third message, which is unfortunately a bit sad, but there is a high need, let's say, for concrete action on the ground, which is missing, which was highlighted by the Dr. Gali of the LAC-Chad Commission. And it's and especially to do action, concrete action in a much more integrated way, as it was several times mentioned, which is not to do a promotion, but it's what we would like to do with the support of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership, with the FREXUS project that we are working in the side in Mali, Niger, and the LAC-Chad. We are working on the Niger Basin, and we will study to try to understand at the moment much more this knowledge, this interaction between all these sectors, and we will start now what we call a more implementation phase, where we will try, if the situation, the COVID situation allow us, and all the security and situation within these countries, we will start the implementation phase, so to go much more on the ground and to discuss with all the involved stakeholders to try to implement some action. Time is running. I don't want to take too much time. I would like to thank you, all the speakers of today. You, Susanne, for the great moderation. I would like to have a special thank you to my colleagues. You don't see them; they are in the background for making this possible. Matthias, Francesca, Irina, Steffi. I forgot a lot of them, of course, and of course all the participants to stay with us all day long, because we are running from a session to another. I know it's quite intense, but don't forget, it's not over. It's continue tomorrow. With the day washing away the pandemic with John Hands. It will start at 10:15 a.m. German time. If you missed some discussion, don't worry, everything will be available soon on the website. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks the speakers for your great input, And as it was said by Mr. Oving, hope to see you soon on the ground to work together and tackle all these issues. Thanks a lot. And have a nice end of the day or beginning of the day for the one who joining us from America. Bye-bye. Thank you a lot.